Welcome to another video from the Chemeketa Writing Center. Today we're going to focus on MLA style block quotes versus short quotes, when to use a block quote and when to do a short quote style. Now, if your instructor has requested APA style, we're going to have a separate video for that, so you can just stop and go find that video instead. Now, if you're in Writing 121 or Writing 122, most likely your instructor's requested MLA style, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I'm going to assume that you've already got good quality scholarly sources and that you're citing to try and avoid any plagiarism or academic honesty issues. We have two videos, one on each of those issues, if you're having trouble getting started finding sources, or if you're not sure when to quote and when to paraphrase. So I'm going to assume that you've got that set, and in my document here I've got my paper set up in MLA style, and I'm ready for my first quotation. I have a topic sentence. I don't want to start my paragraph with a quote, so I have a topic sentence that expresses the main point of that paragraph. Then I have a sentence that sets up the quote that I'm going to include, and then I've got my quote. And now we know the MLA rule is that if a quote is more than 50 words, we have to handle it as a block quote. But how do we know if we have 50 words? Well, I could do 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that's going to take me a while. Or I can look at the number of lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just a tiny bit on this fourth line. We're kind of in the gray area here. So let's highlight my text, my quote, and let's see. Down here in the lower left corner, it shows me that I have 46 words. That is less than 50, so I don't need to handle it as a block quote. So, and I've already got my MLA style citation in the right place. I'm using my quote marks. I'm good to go. Now, before I move on, I want to make sure that I spend an equal amount of time discussing this quote. So if I have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of quote, I'm going to want to spend 1, 2, 3, 4 lines discussing. And how do I want to do that? I want to analyze the quote. I want to go into my own thoughts and opinions, the significance of this quote, further ramifications of it. I want to question the quote. I'm going to spend some time analyzing the quote before I move on to another quote. Be careful that you're not doing quote, another quote, another quote. You want to avoid that. Your paragraph should be mainly your own thoughts and ideas and your own analysis with the quotes to support the points that you're making. So be careful that you're not having too many quotes in a row and that you're spending that time discussing. Now, sometimes you want to try and reduce the amount of quoting even when you have a fairly short quote like this one. This is 46 words. It's kind of in that gray area. And we can look at the quote itself. About 30,000 Americans are killed by guns every year. About 2/3 of them suicides. Now, they put this little extra bit of information in here, and maybe we feel like we don't really need that. You can go in and manipulate the quote, and we can just erase this part here, and we can do what's called an ellipsis to show that we took something out. An ellipsis is period, space, period, space, period, space. And there we go. We've shown our reader that some information has been taken out. And as a consequence, we're down to 3 lines of text and 43 words. So we've reduced the total amount of quote. This is really important in a paragraph where you have, say, 2 or 3 quotes. Every word matters, and you may want to use the ellipsis to reduce the overall amount of quoting you have happening. It's a great technique to use when the middle of a quote really isn't as relevant, but the beginning and end part is what you really want to share with your reader. So don't be afraid to go in and manipulate your quotes. So then I go on to my second body paragraph. Again, I have a topic sentence that's not a quote. Then I have a lead-in that sets up my quote. And now I've got a little bit longer quote. So let's look. How many lines is this one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can tell just from the number of lines that this is going to be handled like a block quote. But if I'm in doubt, highlight my text, come down here to the lower left corner, and I see that I have 79 words in this quote. I better handle this like a block quote. How am I going to do that? First thing, I'm going to remove my quotation I'm going to separate off this quote from the rest of my paragraph. So now I've got it in its own section, and I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to hit tab once, tab twice. I've brought it in 10 spaces. Another way to look and see is it at that 1-inch mark from my margin? Okay, so what just happened was I noticed that with my block quote that I was showing up even with 2 tabs, that I was in line with that paragraph indent. So I knew that something was wrong. So what I did to troubleshoot my problem was I highlighted all of my text, and I went in and I went to paragraph right here. And I checked to make sure that my first line indent was set to 0.5. And that was the problem, was that my tab wasn't set correctly. So I'm just going to go to OK. And now it indented the first line of my quote, and I'm just going to remove that. Now I'm going to highlight my quote, and I'm going to hit tab once, tab twice. See how that got it to the right indent? To further than our paragraph indent, that's what you want. You want it indented 10 spaces or 2 tabs. If 2 tabs isn't getting you far enough over, chances are that your document isn't set up in correct MLA style, or that something's wonky with your word formatting. So I noticed that, I fixed it. Now my quote, my block quote, is looking correct. I've got a period at the end of my citation, then I have my source. That's the little bit different part with the block quote, is that you have the period at the end of the quotation, then your blocks, then your quote for your citation for your block quote. So what we have here is I've got it set up, and now be careful. Notice what happened here was the computer tried to go ahead and indent this new line when I come back to the paragraph. I do not want just a 2-sentence paragraph here with the block quote. I want to go ahead So what I've done is I've made sure that this line is in line with my margin, not indented, because it's continuing part of this paragraph. I can't move on to a new paragraph until I've discussed this block quote. Don't end paragraphs with block quotes. You need to spend an equal amount of time discussing this long quote. And this long quote was like 6 lines of text, so I want a good 4 to 5 lines discussing this quote before I move on, because your paragraph should be 5 to 7 sentences, and that is not counting the block quote. The block quote, you don't just want 2 sentences and then your block quote. The block quote doesn't count for the total length of paragraph. So again, this is the block quote, this is my setup, and then this is my discussion. I don't want to have a block quote, single sentence, and then going right into another block quote. In a given paper, in your average 4 to 5 page research paper, you're going to have a lot of quotations, but you want to minimize the amount of block quoting that you're doing. In that average research paper, you might have 1 or 2 block quotes. You're not going to have a block quote in every single paragraph, and you're certainly not going to have a block quote in every page even, because that's going to be that you're using too much of the source and not enough of your own discussion. So again, in a 4 to 5 page research paper, maybe 1, maybe 2, possibly 3, but you're not going to have that many block quotes. Your majority of your quotes are going to be like example number 1, the shorter quote that happens within the body of your paragraph. These block quotes are going to be special. They're kind of like hot pepper, and a little bit adds interest and spice to your paper. Too much just ruins your paper. So be careful, use them sparingly. So what if I say, you know what, I just had a big block quote, and I don't know if I want 2 paragraphs back to back with a block quote, but this is really important information. How could I reduce the size of this quotation to still keep it within the body of my paragraph? Well, I've got to get it under 50 words, right? So getting it back set up into the body of my paragraph. Now I'm going to look at, I'm going to see what information I could remove using those ellipses to show that I removed something. One major loophole is the failure to require background checks for private sales of firearms, which account for some 40% of all sales, making it difficult to prevent illegal gun trafficking and keep guns from falling into the hands of felons, minors, the mentally ill, or individuals under restraining orders in domestic violence cases. Also, Congress allowed a 1994 ban on the sale of certain types of assault rifles and high-capacity gun magazines to expire in 2004. Maybe what I really care about are these statistics, and this middle part here where it discusses the difficulties, maybe that's something I want to include in my analysis, and I'm going to discuss that in my own words using paraphrase. I'm going to discuss each of those points in depth in my analysis, and I don't really need them here in my quotation. That's a strategy that I can totally use. So I'm just going to delete that, and I'm just going to do my ellipses again. Period, space, period, space, period. Now I know, now my reader knows that I took something out. Now let's look and see, did I get under 50 words? 51. What is there a little bit extra thing that I could remove here? You can have more than one ellipsis in a given quote. That's totally fine. Does when it expire really matter to my particular research paper? It might to yours, but not to mine. So I'm going to take it out, and I'm going to do another ellipsis here. Need to get my quote mark facing the right way there. Okay, now let's check the amount of words here. What did I get it down to? We don't count the ellipses as words, so 46 words. That means that I don't need to do a block quote. So I've reduced the amount of quote using 2 ellipses, and now in my discussion, I'm going to discuss some of that information that I eliminated, and I'm going to put it in my own words, not just changing a word or two, but in fact, I'm going to go in depth on each of those points. If I'm paraphrasing, I probably am going to want to go ahead and still cite Chew. Anytime you look back at the source, it gets a citation, but I've reduced the need for the number of quotes, and that's important. Paraphrasing should be your majority of your paper, and paraphrasing in your own discussion, your own words, your own analysis. That's where you're showing that you're really thinking about the sources, you're using the sources, you're making up your own points, and you're using the sources to support those points. That's the majority of your paper. Actual quoting, you want to try and keep at around 30% of your paper, maybe 40% of your paper. Not very much though. A good research paper can be 20% quotes, and that's totally fine as long as you're citing every bit of information. You remember that citation is not just limited to quotations. So if I have a nice paraphrase here and I have some information in this sentence and some information in this sentence from my source, I better go ahead and add citations to where I'm paraphrasing. Here, getting it formatted correctly. And this information here, let's just pretend that this is coming from the source too. So as you can see, the amount of space of this paragraph, this quotation, has been reduced. I'm still citing the places where I'm paraphrasing. Get rid of that extra period there. I'm still citing the places where I'm paraphrasing because I looked back at the source. That information came from the source. I need to give credit for it. I go into more depth about that in the plagiarism and proper citation video. So let's recap our quotation strategy using MLA format. I want to try and reduce my quotes under 50 words wherever possible. I can reduce them using ellipses. Sometimes I need to add some clarity to my quote. And let's give an example of doing that. He reported on the significance always having citation with my quote. Now, the he is ambiguous, and maybe in reading the article, I know who the person was, and I need to tell my reader that. So I have bracket, Mr. Jones, bracket, space. So I've removed he and I've added my own words to add clarity. An ellipsis removes words. A bracket adds words. It's okay and preferable to go in and manipulate your quotes to make the most sense to your reader, using ellipsis to remove phrases, using brackets to add phrases. Where we can do that, we're really showing why we're using a quote, and we're really adding value for our reader by limiting the quotes to the information that's most relevant to your paper, and by adding clarity that makes sense within the overall context of your paper and why you have that quote. So when possible, you're going to try and reduce the quote to under 50 words. When it is over 50 words or 4 lines of text, you are going to need to do what I showed you, and you're going to need to do a block quote. A block quote is indented 2 tabs or 10 spaces in. And you want to make sure that you're limiting the amount of those block quotes, that you're not doing too many block quotes. That's really important for the overall flow of your paper. And again, in a given 4 or 5 page research paper, you're going to have maybe 2, possibly 3 block quotes, or even no block quotes. That's totally fine too. You may have all short quotes, and that's awesome, because that's you really breaking up the sources, really discussing each of your quotes. And remember my other tip, to not stack quote, quote, quote. You want to have quote, an equal amount of discussion, another quote if it's relevant, an equal amount of discussion, another quote if relevant. So really breaking up those quotes. The bulk of your paragraph should not be quotation. And again, 20%, 30% of your paragraph as quotation, you can get away with that. Half of your paragraph as quotation, you're kind of inching into the gray area. If 75% of your paragraph is citation or quotation, if 75% of your paragraph is a quotation, that's excessive. You want to balance your quotation with an equal amount of discussion. And be careful when you're looking at the overall amount of your paper that the bulk of your paper is not quotation. You're going to get a much lower grade than you would otherwise if you put sources in your own words and have a lot of your own analysis, really questioning, going into depth, talking about the significance, the ramifications, the overall implications of something, really going into your own thoughts and opinions. That's where college writing really takes place. It's not an encyclopedia article, and you don't want the bulk of it to be coming in the form of quotations. So really watch that. So this has been how to handle quotes with MLA style. If you need APA style, we've got another video for you on that coming up.